Good evening, Key Biscayne. My name is Andrea Aqua, the village manager. Thank you for being with us this evening. We have two things up for tonight. The staff is going to do a presentation in a workshop setting, and then we will turn it over to the council. We have Mayor Davey with us, Vice Mayor Moss, Councilmember Laredo, Councilmember McCormick, Councilmember Petros. Councilmember London is on a plane, I understand, and Councilmember Segurola will be joining us about halfway through the workshop material. So thank you council members for being here and giving us this opportunity to take a deeper dive into what these, specifically the work orders that were pulled from the August 25th council meeting. Our goal today is to really help everybody understand what the objective is of those work orders, what we would be able to do in-house and what we would not be able to do in-house, to try to give you a sense of our skills and our bandwidth. And then during the special meeting, the council will have the opportunity to further reflect and have the 3 agenda items that were deferred to this meeting, which are the 2 AECOM work orders, as well as 1 work order for KCI, which is for surveying work. So without further ado, if I may, Mayor, I would just jump into the presentation.
That's fine. Let's go ahead.
Okay, great. So I will share my screen here. And I'm going to do, okay. So can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, all right, great. So today our workshop is focused on our stormwater utility improvements. And there are also some elements of the right-of-way that will be improved as we sort of button up, is the analogy I like to use. Once we dig up the road to put in the underground infrastructure, we've got to make things nice and polished for the residents afterward. So here's our team on the village side. So I'm the manager. We have Mr. Jake Ozyman, who's here with us as well, with more acronyms behind his name than we can possibly call out, as well as Dr. Samimi, who also has several degrees, and we're going to go through kind of what their roles are and what my role is to try to help illustrate what is within our capabilities and what is not. And then also the subject of the special meeting this evening would be AECOM, which is the vendor that the council has pre-qualified to do some of the engineering work for us. But now we're going to be discussing the work order specifically. So to give you a sense of the strength of the staff here, Dr. Samimi has been with us for a few months now. He has a PhD in coastal system science from University of Massachusetts. He has a master's in water resource engineering from Tufts. He also has a master's in environmental policy with over a quarter of a century worth of experience. So it's great to have that level of talent with us. And you can see also on my screen some of the things that we've been working on, including the water conservation and quality of water. That's something that is so mission critical for all of us. And in the past, we've leveraged our partners like the foundation and water keepers. And thankfully, because Dr. Samimi's with us, we're better able to in-house much of that work, including getting our own samples, which allows Dr. Samimi to really get out in the field and collect those samples and analyze the results alongside some of the other professionals in the area. The beach nourishment, as you know, in of itself has been a tremendous undertaking with regard to the permitting. Luckily, Dr. Samimi got to join us at the time toward the tail end of something that has been under the works for several years. When I started with the village and I asked our coastal engineer, who's also a resident in the village, how long does it take to get a permit to do a beach nourishment? And the answer was 4 years. So I said, well, how far into this are we? And he said, no, we're pretty much at the finish line. So thankfully, that a lot of that work has already been done. We're trying to address some of the legislation that the council has been interested in and that we are particularly supportive of to try to help us reduce our impacts on the environment. He's also involved, we pulled him into, the COVID testing program and looking at different code amendments. He's also responsible for transportation. We're trying to look at alternative modalities and not only to make us as a community stronger and more diverse in how we get around and more healthy and fit using sunshine and walking and cycling around. There is a scientific approach to transportation and sustainable transportation models that we're looking at, not to mention renewable energies and things like this. Jake Ozyman, who is our public works director, has his master's in civil engineering and construction management from New York University. He is a professionally licensed engineer. He also did the Envision Sustainability professional course, and he's also recently, since he's been with the village, one of our main concerns, as we all know, is flooding. And so he has taken the initiative to become a certified floodplain manager, and he also has over 20 years of experience. I think folks can resonate with what Jake has been going through. We've consolidated the building department with public works. And so really he took on 2 director positions, not to mention all of the day-to-day work that entails. We've also recognized that we want to increase our standards in public works. So it's one thing to maintain things as status quo, but to really institutionalize change and take things up a notch and to a higher performing level, that takes even more commitment and time. And what we are doing is elevating our standards. So I'm thankful to Jake for putting forth those efforts and acknowledge what kind of time that takes. In addition, he has helped us by doing a lot of design in-house, including most of the Fernwood parking design, and there are other drainage projects that the council may or may not even know about that he has been able to take the initiative on and do some of these designs in-house, which whenever we can, we do. Our philosophy is, if we can do it in-house and and it's a priority, we will. But we also need to be sensitive to our limitations. Here are some of the other functions that Jake is responsible for, including code compliance, which is another area that we don't want status quo. We're listening to the council and to the community, and we recognize that we want to do better, and that also takes time and energy. Not to mention our FEMA community rating system, of which all 3 of us are actually involved in, and as well as the building official. So the reason why I went through that is not only because I'm grateful to be working with guys like this, and it's really a privilege for me, but I wanted to put into perspective, on the left side of your screen, you'll see that the proposal before the council this evening, there are 13 different job classifications with very specialized expertise in the proposal, and the amount that the man hours, the labor hours that we're anticipating it's almost over 1,400 man hours. So we went through the exercise and we looked at the price proposal, and we basically said, okay, if I, as the village manager, take over as much as I'm qualified to do, which basically was the project management, project oversight, principal in charge, at 312 hours of work, if I did nothing else but focus on this as a fully dedicated resource, we're looking at about 2 months of work with nothing else being done. If Jake took on the responsibility of being the engineer of record and designing the system and signing and sealing it and all of the work that involves, much of which he is qualified to do and is capable of doing, some of which he's not, admittedly, we're looking, based on the proposal before us, of 700 hours, so which would basically consume him for 3 months, and then all of the work that he does elsewhere would be sacrificed. And then when we look at, Roland Samimi's work, and let's say he could take on the hydro modeler work, and he could take on some of the scientific roles, when you add up those man hours, you're at 430 hours, which would basically consume him for 2.5 months. And there are, and I think it's also important to point out that assumes we owned the software to do this, which we don't, and that we were trained on how to use that software, which we're not. So that would, impact our learning.
And Andrea, that's only for one work order, not both work orders. Correct.
So that's just off the first work order. So one of the things we wanted to point out is, we're taking this under, we're responsible. The government, the council, the staff, we as a team are all responsible for protecting the people and the property in the village from the potentially damaging effects of stormwater runoff. It's a capital intensive exercise. There's continuous investment required. And it is a fundamental, to me, I think it's the most important real thing that impacts everybody's quality of life on a day-to-day basis. And we want to fix it. We want to resolve it. And when I first started with the village almost 2 years ago, one of the actions that the council took was to fund these improvements and to help us bring our existing infrastructure, which is quite fragile, up to a higher standard. So I wanted to take a moment here to walk us through high level, kind of the sequence of events over time. So back in 1940s, the original Rickenbacker Causeway was built. In the 50s, the Mackle brothers came and they began sort of developing, some of the single family homes and putting in some of the underground infrastructure. When we incorporated in 91, we inherited a lot of the infrastructure that was done by the Mackle brothers privately, as well as some of the infrastructure that had been done by the Water and Sewer Department. And in 93, we really took control over our destiny. And that's when the first stormwater management master plan was prepared for the village. Fast forward a bit to 2011, and that was when we did an update to the master plan. And then subsequently in 2015, there was a desire to come up with an implementation plan. And we wanted to point out a few things about each step of the way and some of the challenges and opportunities I think that have come before us at this point. So the 1993 master plan, you can see the visual here on the screen. It basically took a piecemeal approach. There were some areas that were identified where there was localized issues, there was localized flooding, and the village, this plan basically took those highest risk or most prone to flooding areas, and they did localized improvements. And what that means is that those improvements are not integrated as a network. They're not integrated as a holistic system. It's a catch basin here, a pipe here, a French drain here, but they don't work across, there's no network. There's no network to address some of the significant flooding issues that we are facing then and that obviously have been compounded since. The 2011 update did recommend improvements with a little bit more of a refined approach. Basically, this is, they were using it's called SWIM. It's a proprietary software model to identify what methods and what improvements specifically would not only meet regulatory requirements, but also create this sort of network that begins to take into account what the village really needs, which is a holistic approach to our flooding problem. In this plan, there were 3 major areas that were identified. So starting from the left of your screen, figure 5.4, which is basically the area just west of Oceana, sort of the south of Key Colony. In the center screen, you'll see there that's northwest of the Village Green. And then the third location is just west of the K8, which is consistent with where we are now, which is, that K8 basin is the priority area that we were focusing on. So this is all great. However, what the 2011 update didn't do was then the village engaged then in 2015 EAC to basically say, okay, conceptually here we've identified these problem areas. However, what we needed to do was, okay, what is the solution that we can implement? So EAC came back to the village and presented a 2-tier approach. Tier 1 introduced the backflow preventers, and then tier 2 had actual infrastructure improvements. However, they were conventional in nature. They weren't pressurized systems. It was basically the infrastructure that would rely solely on gravity. And as we all know, as conditions have changed over the last several years, in 2015, and we've worked closely with Jose Lopez, who's a resident of the village, and he's sort of our stormwater go-to guy to kind of fill in our understanding of the history and what has happened. Admittedly, he said in 2015, we just weren't thinking about the sea level rise projections to the extent that we are looking at them now, and with the amount of data that we have now. It just wasn't really available. So what we wanted to show here, based on the data in the 2015 implementation plan, what you see before you in blue. So let's assume a rain event that dropped 6 inches of rain. And so let's think of your home, think of your business. I can think of myself here in the office, what my experience is. Okay, there's a rain event, drop 6 inches. At its worst case scenario, what you see before you, the areas where there is blue on our streets, basically indicate from about 1/10 of an inch to about 6 inches of water on the roadway. The areas that are green and kind of shifting into yellow, you're looking at about 1/2 foot, so 6 inches to up to about 1.5 feet. And then you can see some areas where we start to get into the most critical areas, closer to the beach there, where you see the red colors, and you see a little bit also in the K8 basin based on the 2015 data, where you're actually getting over 1.5 feet of flooding, which is really problematic. If you take it the next level, so now let's think of 14 inches of rainfall in any given period of time. In this model, it was actually over a 72-hour period, but you can start to see now we're really underwater. I mean, all of our streets have at least 1 inch to 6 inches. Quite a few have, upwards of 1 foot. And then you're in some really severe areas where you're over that 1.5 feet. So to try to bring this into perspective, so if folks remember just a few months ago, we had an event over Memorial Day weekend. And when we add up the rainfall that took place over that 3-day total, you're looking at almost a 15-inch rain experience that we had. And this is a video here. I'm sure many of you have seen this, and this is what was happening in our streets. And this is the 2015 data doesn't even take into account the sea level rise, doesn't even take into account many of the high tides, the king tides that we experience. So it's really, we're selling ourselves short if we think that the data that we have now is sufficient. The modeling and the design does not take into account what our current conditions are. And that is one of the main reasons why we need to take this next step with AECOM. So I would ask each of us to think on, based on, keep that as a level of service policy decision. I think we need to think of a snapshot in time, X number of inches, as we just saw. So 6 inches, 14 inches, 15 inches. What is our tolerance for how much rain is going to be on the roadway? And I think I have been speaking with council members about the amount of time that the water will take to recede. Having gone through this process and developing this work order with our staff and with I've come to the realization that I think a simpler, cleaner way to explain this so that everybody is on the same page is what level rain water event can we tolerate no flooding on the street? And Jake and I talked about this, where he lives at home, where he lives. There will be a rain event of that sort of magnitude. And there is no flooding on the street. So it becomes like it's a non-issue. So instead of thinking about this, how long will it take to recede? Let's think about the different levels of precipitation compounded by sea level rise and everything else that we're facing, tidal events. What is our tolerance for when we start seeing flooding on our roadways? And I think, technically what we showed you is considered a 100-year storm from the data, the way that the data is presented and is spoken about. But I think we can all agree that this happens much more frequently than every 100 years. So bear with me here. This is a little bit of a complicated graph, but I'm just going to sort of focus us in on one data point here. So basically, these are some of the projections of sea level rise over a longer term planning horizon. So let's just look, right now we're at 2020, let's look 2030. The first data point we have here, in 2040, perhaps 10 inches on the more conservative, on the lower end of the scale. If we go by the IPCC median model, you're looking at 10 inches. So we saw what happened at 6 inches. We saw what happened at 14 inches. If you add on top of that a base sea level rise that is the sea level that's 10 inches higher than that, basically we have a gravity system, and we wouldn't be able to handle it. We would not be able to handle it because our infrastructure that is using gravity right now would basically be underwater. It would be obsolete, and it wouldn't work. Furthermore, the challenges with the 2015 plan, or not the challenges, but the next steps, is that there was no design document provided. So although the analysis was done, it identified the critical areas, there was some modeling done to kind of get us a handle on what the situation was. The solutions were discussed in principle, but it didn't get to the point where we had actual design. And so what we're moving to now is a design criteria package. That's the second work order that we're going to be talking about, to actually create a design build approach, which is more cost effective and quicker. And also in 2015, the idea of having a really unified system to address our flooding didn't exist. We would have had to construct and design each project on a one-off basis, which would lend itself to, perhaps inequities in the system and just not an optimized system. So we wanted to, again, tie this back to our customer experience, to you, the taxpayers, and our existing system, as I said, is fragile, and it's failing. So here are some shots that we took, by Harbor Point, South Mashta Drive. Harbor Point in particular, this is a project where the village is making some improvements now to address what is happening there. And then, off Woodcrest, Mashta Place, on a perfectly sunny day, no rainfall. And, I've spoken with some council members who, this is your experience. You walk out of your home and there's just flooding. It just exists, even without compounding issues like the health of Biscayne Bay or finished floor elevations, or the king tides that we're facing. So then in 2018, just to kind of recap, the 2015 plan had the tier 1 backflow preventers, which we completed in 2018, and then the tier 2 improvements, which relied pretty much on a gravity system that did not have design documents, and it didn't account for the boundary conditions like sea level rise that are so important for us to consider at this time. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over. I actually have let me walk through here. So basically what we're trying to do here in the first work order is take everything we know to be true, take everything that we now know that we didn't know in 2015, which is a tremendous amount of information, including the health of Biscayne Bay, including the storm inundation projections that we get from FEMA, as well as the work that the South Florida Climate Compact has done, not to mention changes in rainfall as a result of climate change. Once you add all that new information into the model, what we are all going to see as a result is a design for a stormwater system that will be able to withstand, not only help us out with current day sunny day flooding, but it will also address, based on the council decision on policy, what level sea level rise projection are we going to build to. And then once we can take ownership of what our standards are and what our policy standards will be, then we can move into the second work order, which is going to use all the modeling and evaluation done, the engineering done in work order 1, to do the design criteria package and actually get moving.
Andrea, I think it's also important to explain that in order for AECOM to use the existing modeling tool, they have to reconcile all the disparate pieces and parts that have been put together over the last 25 years and figure out where the deficiencies are, where the inadequacies are. And then once they have that understanding of the tool, they can actually own it and utilize it to do design criteria packages that they can then sign and seal and then pass on to a contractor for build.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that. Right. And so to Dr. Samimi's point, so a summary of tasks under work order 1 that will be before the council this evening after our workshop here. I think it's important to note, and this was something, the first time I sat down with AECOM and Dr. Samimi and Mr. Ozyman, it was important to me to understand what the scope is of what we're doing. And I had the same concern that many of our council members had. Wait, guys, I don't want to study anymore. Are we studying or are we acting here? And indisputably, we are acting, and we are taking advantage of what information we have. We are adding to it the new information that we didn't have back in 2015, and bringing forth policy decisions to council. And that's really what I'm most excited about, is to be able to come back to council after this work order is complete and be able to present to the council, okay, let's agree on what sea level rise projection we're going to build to and what level of service. So how much rain are we going to tolerate where we want no flooding? Is it 10 inches? Is it the 14 inches? Is it the 16 inches? When you take into account all of the different variables that you have to consider these days when you're looking at flooding on a barrier island.
Yeah, and under work order 1, it establishes all the boundary conditions and the discharge opportunities and all the best management practices for green infrastructure that is going to be used village-wide in all subsequent design criteria packages.
Right. And I think the one area that the team, we agree on is, the public engagement does make up quite a bit of the work authorization. And I think my experience since I've been here, we've got a very, very engaged community. And I think we would be remiss not to engage everybody to the extent that they need to be engaged, so that they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And as detailed, as technical of questions as residents and our elected body and all of our stakeholders have, we want to be able to really get that buy-in, really make sure that we are making an investment to meet the expectations of our council as well as our residents. And then finally, work order 2 is the actual drainage design, coordinating the utilities, the MOT, the permitting, the bidding services, and then the result will be the award of a construction contract to be able to build the necessary infrastructure to this higher standard that we are now establishing through work order 1. So high level, we wanted to put forth just kind of the timeline. We talked about what it would look like if if Roland and Jake and I did nothing but this, how long it would take, assuming that we could even master all the skills that are being included in this work order, and the team that it takes, 13 different levels of skill and technical expertise. But to kind of give you a sense of scale, we use September of 2020 because we had assumed that we would get the authorization in August, so we didn't change the timeline just so that we can see something that we had seen before. But basically, you see on the left-hand side the tasks for work order 1 and the task for work order 2, and then the black line is basically on each row is the duration. So best management practices is something that Roland spoke to. That's basically the water treatment. So you're looking at 120 days, and you can see the overlap of the timeline. I think one of the main issues that I'm aware of here is the environmental permitting. So third to last row, you can see there's quite a long window of variability. There are a lot of environmental factors that need to be considered when going through the permitting, especially with regard to Biscayne Bay and the discharge and the quality of the water. The health of Biscayne Bay is so important to us, and the environmental permitting is the process we're going to go through to make sure that everything we do is environmentally sound and sane. So with that, that concludes our presentation. Hopefully that wasn't too long, but informative. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and we are available for questions.
Okay. Do I see any hands? Councilmember Laredo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, staff, for the presentation. I wanted to, for those who are from the public who may be listening, sort of in a simple way, highlight what we're talking about here. We're talking today about an expenditure of $1,300,000. It's called work orders. 300, 500, and 500, $1,300,000 in our projected budget for next year of a roughly $34 million. So to put things in perspective, that is what is being discussed today. I asked for this or a special meeting following this because I wanted to ask some questions, and the manager very insightfully reflected my concerns of trying to, my purpose is to figure out what much is studying and how much of this 1.3 in plain English, not in this engineering language or government speak language so the people understand. $1,300,000. From my notes, we talked about a plan we have in 10-11, which is only 9 years ago, and we had another plan, which means a study. We probably paid some consultant at 2015. And so now 5 years later, we're gonna spend $1,300,000 out of a $34 million budget. I'd like to know, what is it that we are doing that is tangible? We don't need any more descriptions or projections on climate change or anything like that. The problem is very definable visually. People can visually see it, that this is a problem. So my question is, if you can answer, and maybe we can go by each one of those contracts. There's 3 of them. You mentioned 2, but there's 3 contracts, right?
Yes, sir.
Of this $1,300,000, why don't we walk through them and see what it is actually doing, or is it just another plan to then actually do bricks and mortars and solution of problems?
I think
so to frame the conversation away from all the other projections and charts and
yeah, and you know what? I'd also like to frame the conversation by adding that in order for something to be built, you need to have design criteria packages. You do not have.
Yeah, some of us
do not have a design criteria package. So that's just a required component of moving forward. If in truth we don't want to move forward, then we don't need to do the design criteria packages, and we can just stick with what we have.
You know, Doctor,
so there's that element, and as far as, you know, reconciling all the various work that has been done to date, that's a very, very small component of $1.5 million.
I see, Doctor. Some of us have some experience in our private lives that actually have done construction and done public life, so we know.
Sure, I understand that.
That no, just so that to answer your point, I understand that, but my question still becomes, what is something that is absolutely necessary, and what is something that is absolutely doing today? Because when we were getting on, some of the councilmen were telling me what the rain situation is in Key Biscayne today. Out of this $1.3 million, because all kinds of stuff.
Okay, do you want to get, can we have the manager answer your questions?
Right, well, he jumped in.
Why don't you respond to the council members' questions, please?
Yes, happily, thank you. So what is absolutely mission critical is having the design. So in order to construct, we need the design documents. So that's mission critical. I think it would be risky, in my opinion, but what we could sacrifice, and I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but is really the soft cost is the public engagement. And so I think as a council, as an elected body, Councilmember Lennon's not here with us, but he kind of called me one day and he said, "What are we doing with the leaky roof in the gazebo?" I said, "Well, we're fixing it." And he said, "Well, are you doing public engagement?" And I said, "Well, it's a maintenance issue. The roof's leaking. We've got to fix it." So there are certain things where we found ourselves in trouble, really, because the community wasn't aware of what we were doing, didn't adequately participate, and we've learned lessons from that. So I'm not advising.
Wouldn't that be your responsibility?
Councilor, let her finish. Let her finish her presentation, and then we can get through this.
I will do everything I can to get the public engagement. My problem is I don't have the technical expertise to be able to explain how it's going to work or why it's going to work. If the council as a board, as a body, believes that our community will accept making an investment upwards of $20 million over the next 3 years to do these improvements without the technical understanding. I hope, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I am.
Look, and I would also add that Jake and I are most definitely happy to engage the public and explain to them what's going on. However, this whole municipal infrastructure improvement program, which is a multi-year, multi-tens of millions of dollar program, is done as a team, working with the engineers, working with the consultants, working with the contractors, all together in a unified manner. Now, Miami Beach went forward and decided to short shrift themselves on public engagement, and it completely blew up in their faces, and it caused them more problems than it solved. In fact, it didn't solve any problems, it just caused problems. Now, you know, we can do that. Jake and I can do that, but certainly we can't do it in isolation or in a vacuum.
I don't think, Doctor, I'm just going to, I think Dr. Councilmember Laredo, and correct me, Councilmember, what he's asking for, what are the costs that are actually are action items? I don't think he's saying necessarily that public engagement is not an action item, but I think that's what, if I'm right, rather than just doing another study, what is actually going to get, I think, as he said, bricks and mortar on the ground or under the ground in this case? Like what?
Quite frankly, I would say that it's everything but the $54,000 that's being dedicated to the gap analysis, which needs to be done in order for AECOM to have a usable tool that they can then do design criteria packages that are that they can sign and seal for. By law, they have to.
Okay.
So $54,000 out of $1.5 million.
Great. Right. Councilmember, does that answer your question?
No, thank you, Mayor. What is the, I am sorry that Ed London was not here, but fixing the gazebo is a rather easy in a small communications issue that certainly can be handled. We have a newsletter, we have all kinds of things. And he brought up the issue because this word comes up in all kinds of different ways. The last meeting we had, he talked about all these extravagant expenses we have in every consultant of so-called outreach, which here is called public engagement, other people call public relations. But every one of the consultants that we hire have a component of, quote, outreach, public engagement, et cetera, et cetera. So tell me, what is the amount of public engagement in these three contracts?
So in this is
$127,000.
$127,000.
That's correct. Yeah.
Holy cow!
All right.
Holy cow! 10%. 120. Yeah, basically 10% of $1.5 million.
So
I'm blown away.
No, Councilmember, respectfully, I think this is going to be a debate we're going to have when we're debating whether.
You're right.
This is more about the nature of the project and what these are. So I understand. I'd rather have this conversation when we're debating to have a vote. This is more about what is the substance of the projects that are being contemplated. Are there any council members or any Councilmember Petros?
In my learning about some of these projects, it seems like we're doing more, or they're going to be looking at more than just our stormwater system. And it will include analyzing the roads and some of these other things that you are putting together. And if I understood it correctly, you're looking to do almost like a test pilot around the K-8 center. And if you could just explain to the public what's included outside of the pump and everything underground, but what you're putting together and why, and how these services that we are looking to potentially approve, how they're broader than just our stormwater. If I'm wrong, please let me know.
Hi, good evening, council members. Jake Ozyman. I'm going to try to answer your question. Right, the K-8, it's not just a pump station. The entire program is going to include, you're going to look at the pump stations, the command system, the piping, the catch basins, the roadway elevations, streetscape. At that point, if there's a policy decision to have, for example, every street there's sidewalks on both sides, and bike lane, and street lighting, signage, you name it, right? So all the things are going to be considered, and typical sections are going to be provided. And when I say typical section, for example, let's just say McIntyre Street. So you have about 100 feet of right of way. At this project, we will decide whether to reduce roadway width and increase the swale area, or raise the roadbed elevation and then look at the effects in terms of what it does to low-lying finished floors, or keep the roadway elevation same, reduce your swale elevation, make it one-way, two-way. These are all the things that this K8 is actually going to do. It's going to be applicable in terms of plug and play to the rest of the community. Now, I want to highlight the public outreach. We'll have to look at every single home and have them, help them understand how is it going to affect them. Again, we don't know if you want to raise the street, lower the street, keep it the same, make it smaller, one-way, two-way, larger swales. There's so many moving parts that this council is going to have to make a policy decision, and I'm sure the public will be very engaged to tell you what their opinion is. And again, I want to highlight that it's a front-loaded contract in the K8. Yes, it is a big number. It's not, doesn't sound small, but I assure you that a lot of effort that's been done under this work order is going to be applicable for the rest of the village. Hence, there will be a lot of cost savings on the subsequent work orders. Would that answer your question?
Yes, and yes and no, I guess. So
Okay.
One of the things that I get confused by is we have a stormwater fund that we're of $18 million. And if we include all these other things, it seems like we're going to run out of money very quickly. And I don't know how you're going to break it up. And with these consultants and engineering contracts, how much of this is going to be spent out of the stormwater fund that we have, and how much of it would be hitting some other bucket in our budget?
Okay. Now, the whole entire stormwater system it's paid on the Stormwater Enterprise Fund, and there are a number of elements in the roadway. It can be also paid because it directly relates to the elevations, hence moving the stormwater. Now, the design can be done under this program. However, the funding, if you were to incorporate streetscape to the project, you could fund it from under funding mechanisms as you wish, whether special assessment or geo bond or PTP, People's Transportation Plan. It doesn't lock you down just because we're looking at it now. It doesn't mean that the whole thing is to be paid on the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. It can be funded throughout a variety of funding mechanisms.
And just to clarify, the design build documents that we would be receiving from the engineering companies would address more than just the stormwater. It would address the streets, and then to actually pay for those projects, that's where we start looking at the different buckets. Is that correct?
That's correct, but that depends very much on the policy that the council makes. So for example, you may very well decide to keep every roadway elevation the same and come up with a pump system. So you're not really looking at changing the roadbed elevations and the geometry. In that case, you're not really looking at that much of a streetscape. But if you do want to raise the street levels, where it's applicable, and again, it's not gonna be applicable to village-wide. There are some streets that are candidates for raising, some that cannot be raised because 90% of homes are low-lying. But again, it's very much depends on the policy.
So to put a timeline in place here and to understand the steps very methodically, number one, we want to do this gap analysis, which costs about $54,000, and it determines what's missing in our previous plans. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So step two, help me with step two. Once we do step one, step two, they're going to design what for us?
Well, before they get into designing, they have to establish the boundary conditions. They have to establish the discharge opportunities. They have to establish the best management practices that are suitable to the area given the geotech characteristics of the village.
So step two would be a study and a an analysis that they would come back to us and let us know what current conditions are.
It's the modeling. It's basically updating the assumptions with the current projections that were not contemplated in 2015.
So it's two things. It's where we are and what we have to plan for, because what we have to plan for is different than what we were planning for in the past. Is that right?
That's
Yeah,
correct.
and what was done in the past didn't even take into consideration these boundary conditions that we're talking about, sea level rise and the effect of climate change on rainfall intensity and frequency and stuff like that.
Okay, so then we will know what our obstacles are, and then the council needs to make a decision on how much they want to spend and what they're going to get for that money, and what that, let's call it, our level of service is for the community. Right. And we're going to have some estimated dollar amounts there, correct? Will we have price tags associated with that at that point?
For the ballpark, yes, you will have.
Ballpark, okay. And then once we make those policy decisions, would AECOM be the ones that would go and do design build on what level of service and what system will accommodate that level of service that we've passed, and potentially know the general amount of money?
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then all of these steps are included in these contracts here?
Yes.
And is that where we stop? At that point, once we get design build documents, then we have to go out to bid to find people to build the plans.
Correct. So you're going to procure your design build contracts, and also towards the end of your first task order. And again, so we have $35 million program, right? Based on when we raise the stormwater fees. And the policy you're going to make is going to tell you how quickly you're going to spend the $35 million. If you were to build a system based on what 2015 plans show that we all know that's outdated and obsolete, then yeah, it's going to cost 35. The moment you increase your level of service, you're going to run out of money. So that's basically going to set your schedule on how quickly we're going to use those monies. Now, at the end of now, the K8 will be in the first one. As the K8 is being built, we're going to move on with the design criteria package for whatever the based on the set policy, not priority number 2, maybe north part of Key Biscayne or south.
Why would there be any public engagement until we got to step 4? Because we wouldn't be doing anything to the public until we made those decisions.
Because ultimately the public has to have an understanding of the system, how it operates, how it's going to operate, what the level of service is going to be. They have to be party to the discussion on level of service, unless of course, I guess the council just wants to decide what level of service, like set the level of service, and that's what it's going to be.
I mean, one of the problems, though, I would think the funding is going to set the level of service potentially too.
To some extent, it would, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. To some extent, it would.
Okay, so then the public engagement comes in basically in conjunction with step 4, and it's about 10% of this total contract, and it's still included in this contract, right?
Mm-hmm. The public engagement is for the entire set of work orders that we're talking about right now.
In your estimation, these 4 steps and public engagement to get us to the point where we would actually be making changes would be how long? How is it? 2 years, 4 years? What is the timeline you project here?
Yeah, I think it's probably close to 2 years, somewhere between 18 and 24 months. I think in that Gantt chart, it pushes out into 2022. I don't have it right in front of me.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, yeah, I'm looking at the schedule now. So we kind of were generous on the permitting. Again, depends on the discharge opportunities. If you bid additional outfalls, then you get involved with the federal government that may put the permitting in a long span. we're looking at shovel in the ground by March 22 for K8.
March 22. Okay. All right. Those are most of my questions. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Amos.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. You know, I met with Roland and Jake earlier, a week ago or so, a little over a week ago. You know, I look at this, and I think what kind of threw me off a while back is that you guys told us that we would have 14 of these work orders that will be coming up that would be, you know, part, I guess, phases or portions of the stormwater system. And we're only looking at one of them in front of us today. And I cannot wrap my head around what the other 13 are going to be and how much it's going to cost. You know, I asked the question roughly after we do the entire project, all 14 of these projects, what would be the fee that AECOM would be would have for all 14 of those projects? And I think I heard of it. I'm not sure if you want to answer that question, Andrea, because I don't want to throw out a number there that might be incorrect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we structured this so that we're heavy loading on the first work order, so that you can set those policy decisions and know what the cost would be of the entire network. Because if
we don't know what that's going to be. Like for instance, I just did something in my head and said, if we do 14 projects and their fee comes out to $3 million on doing 14 projects, because just one project is 500,000, I'm guessing it will step down less and less. You know, that's, you know, if we're looking at a $30 million project of all 14 put together, we're looking at 10% of the hard costs on a soft cost. But this soft cost is only 30% of the design criteria. It's basically a design criteria, which just only takes it up to about 30%. The other 70% is put on the design build. So the way I look at it is that, you know, even in my industry, you know, 10% is very high on a soft cost. And if you're only doing 30% of the work, they should be closer to 3%, not 10% of what the entire project would cost. So I'm trying to still wrap my head around, you know, what is the rest of it? I mean, I'm afraid to vote on one work order at $500,000, not knowing what the rest is going to be down the line. I would like to see the whole thing together and what we'd be looking at. So personally, when we get to the next meeting, I'm not in any way in going to be approving the work order part of the $500,000 because I don't understand the whole scope of the work that we're talking about. Now, that being said, you know, I'm looking at the I guess the master plan is what the master plan update, and what I hear from you guys is that this is absolutely necessary. We have to do this in order to get to the next step. Is that what I'm hearing?
we need to update the modeling for current projections.
Okay, so we have to do that. I completely understand that we have to do that. In our meetings with Jake and Roland, I was not convinced that we need any initial public engagement or a website development. I really don't think we need it at this stage. We might need it in the next stage when we start implementing a work order and we're really talking about, you know, street lights and landscape being affected and all this kind of stuff. But at this point, we're really looking at an older plan, updating models. I don't know what the public input is really going to have on what's going on underground. And I think the input that you can get from us as council members, and we can relay what we hear if we need to reach out. But I think you can get a lot of that front end stuff from us. And then later on, we can see what we need to do. But I don't know, again, how much input. It depends on what's in the project, if we're raising streets or which I'm not 100% sure yet of how we do that. But if we're raising streets or traffic calming, I get that there has to be some input. But if we're solely looking at what's going on underground, I think we could probably do that as a council. Website development, again, I see this just as informational purposes only. You know, I don't see $22,000 to make a website justifiable. I mean, just to have somebody open up a couple pages to put some information on there might be good enough, or this might can overlap our website development that we're doing already, and they can just add a page to it if we need it. You know, I just don't see that. So the way I look at this is I would take that portion out, which is 50% already of that front end project, would already reduce it down to $150,000 if we took that out. And I'm not sure about going to the $500,000 until I can better understand the whole project, the whole scope of work. And that might not be able to come out until we're done with this first step. I don't know. And then understand how AECOM and our consultants fit into that project and what portion they're going to take and how much each one should cost. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with this what's in front of us now tonight.
Okay, Councilmember McCormick, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor. So Brett, you said a lot of the same things that I was thinking, and I am very much in agreement with a lot of what you said. My question, I think, to the manager would be, the 500,000 does seem like a lot for one section. You have, I'm sure that this was explored, but could you talk a little bit about any considerations you made about cost savings, about doing a larger plan rather than just one area at a time, and why you ended up with this approach?
So I'll defer to Roland or Jake on that one. There might be an opportunity there.
Okay, I'll give it a shot on trying to answer. Maybe I could answer some of the questions that the points that the Vice Mayor raised as well. Now, yes, there are 14 additional locations based on previous implementation plan and the master plan stormwater shared areas, but it doesn't mean that we'll have 14 different criteria package out there. So it's not going to be 14 times $500,000. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the program, yes, we budgeted $35 million because we needed some place to start, and that was based on 2015 implementation plan. Again, the true cost of the program is going to be determined when the council makes the policy decisions on what level of service it wants to provide its residents. So you may look at $100 million program or 150. I don't know. Depends on if you wanted to design for 100 storm event that you want no flooding whatsoever. You may have a pump station in every other block. It may be $20 million program. Again, it's all depends on the level of service that this council is going to set and what you want to see on your streets. Again, if you want to raise the streets, you want to make changes to the roadway geometry, use more green infrastructure, be more sustainable and resilient. These are all the moving parts that it's going to have to be decided. And Vice Mayor's point, he's correct. Yes, on rule of thumb in any industry, 10% the whole design. But again, when you look at the overall program, these fees are reasonable. Again, I don't foresee 14 criteria packages that are out there, and it may be 5 or 6. Again, it all depends on how we're going to package them and how we're going to construct them, and how we decide on how much of construction this community can afford financially and psychologically. And those are two important factors that we have to keep in mind. Now, the second question to the council member McCormick's, K8 was the perfect area for us to give priority. Number one, it has everybody's interest, right? So depends on where you live. You may or you may not agree with, if I do improvements in Mashto Island, right? I never go to Mashto Island. Why do I care? But either you have a kid that goes into the K8 school, or you have a friend that has a kid that goes to that school, or you just may care about the community deeply. So K8 was our first target area so that we can improve and largely secure everybody's buy-in.
And also, I just want to add that based on the vulnerability analysis that was
Correct.
in 2017,
Right.
it showed up as one of the highest vulnerability areas of all the other areas on the key.
Absolutely. And when there was no COVID and the kids were going to school, when it's raining, I could see, you know, the kids are skipping from one side to the other side of the street because you want to avoid the flood waters. And so, right, it's one of the most important areas that, and also most vulnerable. And also the K8, the streets, the blocks that surrounds K8 is very typical to the rest of the community in terms of the homes that some newly built and some still macro houses, the roadway width. So whatever the decision that you're going to make on K8 area on and the surrounding areas is going to be a small representative of what you're going to be doing in the village. And it's centrally located, and that was the whole reason on why we thought that the K8 is the best pick as the first go around.
Okay.
Sorry, but my question was, I appreciate that description and it makes a lot of sense and it seems like you guys have put a lot of thought into it, but I think more specifically my question was, why do just the development plan of the one small area first? And I guess it sounds like your answer was that you're going to look for what the experience is once it's done, as opposed to looking for some cost savings by developing an island-wide plan all at once. Is that the answer?
Well, that's correct. Number one, we didn't want to front load the entire cost of doing the entire analysis of the islands. It can be broken to pieces and can be done. And then, yes, we wanted to see K8 and see what kind of improvements we can make and have the community decide on what they want. And also the construction staging. Number one, it's a priority area, so we want to get out of there first. And also at the same time, have small enough areas so that the disruptions to the community is minimal. And I think the K8 present a sweet spot on, you know, it kind of checked all the boxes.
I think we have some residents who have signed up who are attending. If Pete, if you could ask if any of them would like to speak or ask a question, I think now would be the right time.
We do have one raised hand.
Okay.
Caller with telephone number ending in 068. Please dial *6 on your telephone to be heard. Again, telephone number ending in 068. Caller, you are live.
Does that work?
Yep.
Am I live? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Don Ellsberg, 177 Ocean Lane Drive. I am not a lobbyist, but you all understand that this is an issue that my colleagues and I and this side of Crandon and many on the other side of Crandon have been working at for many years. My question and problem is that it appears that all of this discussion about this great stormwater fix, as it were, once again does not take into account the 50% of the population that is living in the condominiums who are, by some of your lawyer judgments, excluded from any participation in this system. And many of the council members are well aware that there's a great deal of concern. About a year ago, you agreed to raise the stormwater tax so that the condominiums are paying about some 60% or more of what actually they're paying over $1 million a year now into the fund and really getting nothing out of it because they're in theory excluded. Our concern is that you have many issues involving stormwater from the water going into the streets to the streets being blocked to all of these things. And we've said over and over again that there needs to be an integrated plan. Yet you are going forward with a 36 or 40 or $50 million out of the $100 million bond issue that every one of these residents is going to pay for and get nothing out of, or not get what they're supposed to be getting out of a unified system. So I just want to say that it seems to me your basic, before you figure out how much you're going to have to pay for PR stuff, which is a reasonable request, I think you got to figure out who is going to be impacted by this major infrastructure project that you're going to be doing. I think that's enough for me to say today. We have some others who may say something today.
I guess putting aside the legal potential issues that have been raised in the past, what are the possibilities of, would we be able to, as we move forward, if council was to decide that they wanted to try and make us one system across the island, could we use the design to do that? Would that be would it be helpful with the data we're getting through the AECOM, through everything? Would that be useful in that pursuit?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this would help us all. I guess that was a point I was going to raise later, but I think it's a valid point. I want to make sure that if we're collecting the data and you know, putting this together, I think that is something that we want to explore. We've talked about exploring it. You know, putting aside the legal possible conundrum, everything else, I think it's important for us to consider it.
Yeah, I'll underline that every public street in Key Biscayne, Mr. Ellisburg, Liz, Ozyman Drive, we're going to survey, and as again the priority area is defined, designs are going to be done, and again, if the council makes a policy to go beyond those lines, we'll be ready to do it.
Okay, so I mean, even if we made a policy decision to include the condominiums in the you know, the streetscapes and things like that, we could still do that and have that data ready to go.
Absolutely.
When we wanted to. Okay, fine.
Stormwater doesn't have the legal boundary. It just
correct. Right. That's kind of my point. Like I noticed in the charts that the manager showed, you know, there were a lot of areas I noticed on the east side that looked fine, and then I realized, well, those are in private condominium areas that were not probably considered at that point. And I think it's important to note that water doesn't recognize private boundary lines.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Hang on one second. Pete, if you could tell, what is the number that people can call in if they want to make a comment? I have somebody who's trying to call in.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching at home and you take a look at the bottom of your screen, or if you're listening in or just streaming, please dial 305-365-7569. And then please enter the meeting ID of 231-627-8415. And for those of you that are logged into the meeting currently, if you wish to ask a question of the panel or council, please dial *9 now.
Okay. Yeah, I know somebody, Tony Camejo was trying to call in and he couldn't get he didn't have the number.
All right, Mr. Mayor, we do have one caller wishing to speak.
Okay.
And that is telephone number ending in 253. And that is telephone number ending in 253. Please dial *6 now to unmute yourself.
There you go.
Caller, you are live.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi, Mike and Jake. And I haven't met Roland yet, and I've heard some very good things about him, and I look forward to meeting him. This is Tony Camejo. Along the lines that were just raised, I think that an integral part of having any stormwater plan has to be for the entire island. I think Jake made the point that water is fungible. It flows where it wants to flow. It doesn't care about boundaries. It's essential that we do this, given that the condominiums are on the receiving side of ocean surge, for one, and then will impact the entire village. So I think that I'd like to see this program include. It really can't be comprehensive. It doesn't include all of the condominiums. In fact, all of the condominiums and the commercial properties, so that we have a real understanding of the problem of stormwater management and drainage and so on. So I think this is essential for the very concept of having a resilient and adequate system for the whole village. And I think it's important also from the point of view of making sure that the maintenance of this system for the entire village is done in a unified and comprehensive way by the village, rather than by individual condos doing their part and then the village doing public streets. And that's the basic comment I'd like to make it. And I hope that the village moves in this direction. Thank you. I hope that the village moves in this direction. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Any questions from from folks who are listening in?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have logged into the meeting and wish to speak, please dial *9 now.
I know there's some other people who want to speak.
Yeah, Pete, there's somebody, the phone number ending 530.
I just saw that this second, sir. All right, phone number ending in 530. Please dial *6 now to unmute yourself.
Hello. Hello. I hope you hear me.
Yeah, we hear you, council member.
Can you hear? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for this great presentation. I have some comments about it that I will speak to Jake and Dr. Sweeney later about, but I absolutely support the idea that we need to work out the maintenance issue with the condominiums, and there's got to be a legal solution to this. You know, they're paying for a stormwater fee. They may not be paying as much as the single family homes are, but we can equalize this situation and help them with their situation. And maybe they have to upgrade their facilities some in order to be able for us to take over the maintenance. But it's absolutely essential that we all become one island. And this is not, this is not the east side or the west side. This is Key Biscayne. So I hope you all work towards this particular idea, and that we all work together on this. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Excuse me, sir. Is that Luis de la Cruz?
There's only one.
Luis de la Cruz, 640 Allendale.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't catch that.
All right. Is there anybody else?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to speak to the panel or ask questions of council, please dial.
Somebody just raised their hand, 093.
Phone number ending in 093. Please dial *6 now to unmute yourself. You are live.
Yes, good evening, council. My name is Juan Santaella, 360 West Heather Drive. Excellent presentation this evening. I just wanted to pitch in from the environmental perspective. Over the years, all of South Florida has disregarded the environment because we have not invested in water treatment. And over the years, we have polluted Biscayne Bay to a sad point that it is today. I am sure that you're all aware of the fish kill events that happened last month. And I would encourage all of you to support including a water treatment element to the Stormwater Master Plan.
That's going to be an email.
So, from a general perspective, stormwater deals with drainage, and I understand that flood control is a concern. I'm a citizen myself. My house was flooded a couple of years back. So I understand the drainage component, but I think that we also have to be good stewards of the environment and make sure that the investment that we're about to make over the next few years includes a water treatment component. So if we end up with a system that drains water into the bay, even if we inject back to the Floridian aquifer, that we treat that water so we lessen the impact on the environment. Thank you.
And to that point, let me just ask again. I guess I was going to ask these questions during our hearing on the merits of the funding, but would we be able to? I mean, these would be public policy decisions, I assume. So if the council wanted to move forward with these things, with filtration and filtration and treatment, those would be part of our design. We could incorporate.
If I may, Mayor, it's not really up to the council. We have to by the federal law.
Right, even better.
Right. I mean, and one other thing that we discussed, adaptability, right? Imagine the Biscayne Bay, every other day there's an article in the newspaper on the health and of the Key Biscayne and the Biscayne Bay. And imagine federal judge comes 2 months later and then says, no more discharge to Biscayne Bay unless you can make it as quality as a drinkable water. What do you do, right? So these are things that we have to think about now. We have outfalls and we have pollution control boxes before it that doesn't function because they're fragile and they're old and they're broken. The whole entire stormwater runs off the bay without treatment, very little. These are things that we're gonna have to consider. That's why the status quo existing system does not meet, not only does it meet the conveyance criteria, it does not meet the water quality criteria. And yes,
under these work orders, AECOM is going to be looking at all the appropriate and applicable best management practices that deal with water quality management aspects of stormwater as opposed to just volume.
Yeah.
All right, because I want to make, one of the things I'd like to see us do as we move forward is, as the caller just said, I want us to be leaders in this. I don't want us to just meet the standards of the federal government. I'd like us to exceed those standards and those communities that leads the way. All right, any other callers?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to speak, please dial *9 now on your telephones.
Okay.
There, nobody else has raised their hand.
Okay. Why don't we move on to the hearing?